You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, we're talking Patriot League here today on Locked On College Basketball. I want to get you ready first with our major storylines. And again, as I talked about just a little bit ago, these previews, these primers are often not necessarily for the Patriot League, like I'm all in kind of person. It's not for them, but it's really for people who might not be too terribly familiar with the Patriot League that needs to know the names and the players and the coaches and the storylines. And so that's why you're hopefully here. So with that in mind, let me give you the 10 teams that currently make up the Patriot League. That is American, Army, Boston University, Bucknell, Colgate, Holy Cross, Lafayette. I'm taking his horse by the reins every time I see Lafayette. That's all I can think about is the Hamilton rap. Guns and Ships, that's what it's called. And then the final three, Lehigh, Loyola, Maryland, not Loyola, Illinois, Chicago, and then wrapping it up, Navy. Interestingly, I'm such a grammar nerd. Things like this are cool to me. There's these 10 teams. None of them are deeper in the alphabet than N. Navy is the last team in this conference alphabetically. Isn't that weird? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, a couple major storylines. One of them is coaching turnover. The AAC and the Patriot League are the two of the 32 conferences in Division I that have the most coaching turnover, just in terms of sheer number. And that's five brand new head coaches in the Patriot League. The difference here, as opposed to the AAC, is that that's literally half the conference. Let me give you those changes in the coaching carousel. American, Dwayne Simpkins comes over from George Mason, where he was an assistant. Army, Kevin Kuick, who'd spent 1 year at Butler as an assistant. Davidson before that. Bucknell, John Griffin, who's been a St. Joe's assistant, is coming to take over at his alma mater. Always love to see those moments when they get to happen. Really cool for Coach Griffin, and hopefully it's a very successful experience. Holy Cross, Dave Paulson is actually coming back to the Patriot League. He's been most recently a Fordham assistant, but has a couple head coaching stops, including George Mason and that same Bucknell team that we just mentioned. And then finally at Lafayette, Mike McGarvey is promoted from within. So there you have these five brand new head coaches this year, again, making up half the conference. That's clearly a major storyline ahead of this season. I think I saw somebody joke about, I can't remember who this was or where it was. Forgive me for not remembering. If you are listening, whoever wrote or said this, but basically the joke was that they got to wear name tags at like when they have conference meetings because half the coaches are new and they don't know each other. So wild stuff there. Although I guess with Coach Paulson coming back in, at least there's some familiarity there. So that helps a little bit. Second major storyline for me, Colgate has been absolutely dominating this conference in the 2020s. So we move, thinking about it. 4 of the 5 tournaments in the 2020s have been won by Colgate, including the last 3 straight. So they won in 19. So I guess that's technically before the 2020s, but you get it. The 2019 season and then 21, 22, 23. So that means 4 out of 5 and again, 3 in a row. They've also won 4 of the last 5 regular season championships, including 2 straight. So it's not quite the same 4 years as their tournament championships. 2019, they shared it with Bucknell, but 2020, they won it outright. 2022, they won it outright. And 2023, they won it outright. And here's the thing. I'm just telling you now, all the writing on the wall tells me that Colgate is running away with this thing again. However, in terms of looking at this, if there's going to be a challenge, the final major storyline I want to hit on is that if there will be one, to me, that's going to come from Lehigh, because their backcourt, to me, is the best backcourt in the conference. You got Keith Higgins and Tyler Whitney-Sydney coming back. And this backcourt, again, to me is the best one in the conference, and it's electric. And as you well know, a backcourt can be game-changing. Guards make the world go round in college basketball, particularly once we get to tournament time. And that's what we're talking about. Who was a team that could challenge Colgate in the conference tournament? Keep your eyes on Lehigh. And this backcourt goes even further because it's not just Higgins. It's not just Whitney-Sydney. You've got a couple freshmen coming in that I think could challenge for some playing time in this backcourt in Nasir Whitlock and Josh Ingram. So watch out for those guys coming along. So looking back to last year, just a little remembrance of what happened last year in the Patriot League. Again, Colgate dominated this whole thing. They won the regular season. Navy and Lehigh were tied for second, but they were Colgate was 6 games ahead of Navy and Lehigh. So when I say they dominated this conference, I mean, that is just an absolute blitzing from Colgate last year. And same thing, conference tournament, they obliterated everyone. I think their closest game was 17 points in the conference tournament last year, and then took a 15 seed in the NCAA tournament where they played a Texas team that was really finding its stride, ended up losing by 20. As for the conference as a whole, they were 27th at KenPom last year. Again, there's only 32 Division I conferences, not great. In fact, Patriot League in every year of KenPom's existence, other than 2012, 2013, has been outside the top 20 in terms of Division I conferences. So that's something they're looking to get back to, something they've only done once. Again, 2012-13 was the only season that the Patriot League was inside KenPom's top 20. And part of that is like, you look at last year, as good as Colgate is, they only ranked 115th at KenPom last year. The next closest was the only other team in the top 200. That was Navy, who was 179th. On the flip side of that, you got 3 of your 10 schools that were outside the top 300 last year. Bucknell was 303, Loyola, Maryland was 325, and Holy Cross 342. Remember, there's 363 teams in Division I last year, and as a reminder, that comes down to 362 this year. So we'll keep our eyes on that. I guess, honestly, this probably should have been in my major storylines because it feels like every other conference we're talking about a ton of this. But here you go. 0 realignment afoot for the Patriot League right now. You got nothing that we're looking ahead to. You know, I mean, there might be rumblings eventually, but as of right now, there is no conference realignment. That is great, great news. We've already talked about the coaching carousel. Let me tell you some about the longest tenured coaches. The longest is Lehigh's Brett Reed, who's been there since 2007 and 2008 season. And so that's your longest tenured guy. Outside of that, you do have 3 other guys who have a decade or more at their school. Interestingly, all 3 of these came in to get, we talked about 5 this year. There's 3 guys who came in together in the 2011-12 season. That was Navy's Ed DeChellis, Boston U's Joe Jones, and Colgate's Matt Langle. And so there is some good tenure, but interestingly, there's a lot of new blood as well. Now, what I want to do is take these teams and try to go about the process of putting them into some tiers ahead of this season so you can kind of think about what teams they each are and where they go. You're probably going to have some pushback on it, and I would love to hear that if you're somebody that knows about a lot about the Patriot League. But I also want to give you my awards and conference championship predictions. All that coming up in just a second. But first, I need to tell you that this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by PrizePicks, which offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide you even more value. And with the PrizePicks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. And seriously, this thing is so crazy easy to do, but it's a lot of fun. For example, you can just pick 2 or more players, and then you have a given stat, and you choose whether that stat is going to be over or under. Here's an example. I was cackling at this last weekend looking at the possibility of it. Patrick Mahomes, more or less than 155.5 passing yards. I'm just going to give you this hint. You want the over on that every day and 5 times on Sunday. So if you want to get in on that action, go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Also use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's ridiculous. Go get in on it. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, let's divide this Patriot League up into some tiers, shall we? There are 10 teams. I've utilized 4 tiers to break them up. Why so many tiers for just 4 teams? Well, because my number 1 tier only has 1 team in it, and that's Colgate. And I hate to do that to the other schools, but I mean, again, remember last year, they won this league by such a wide margin that I just can't in good conscience put anyone around them in the same tier until another team proves that they can be in that tier. And part of this too is because it's not like Colgate did all that and the cupboard's bare. Colgate gets back, in my opinion, 3 guys who are all deserving of at least first team consideration. That's Ryan Moffitt, Keegan Records, and Braden Smith. No, not Purdue's Braden Smith, a different Braden Smith. And probably if you know anything about this Colgate team, Keegan Records is probably the name you know, maybe Braden Smith as well. But also, I want to make sure you know about Ryan Moffitt, who's just an absolute stud of a three-point shooter, 6'6" guard. But even though he's a stud of a three-point shooter, he has just about equal shot selection from two-point range as well. I always love to see that. But in his three-point shot attempts, the last 2 years, he's shot 45.2% on 3.5 attempts a game and 45.3% on 4.2 attempts per game. That is pretty darn consistent and is a great indication that it's repeatable and gonna be who he is. There's not like, oh man, that one dude that shot 45% from 3 that one year. Nah, almost identical for the past 2 years in terms of percentage, but man, that attempts per game jumped up to 4.2. In those 2 years, he was a total of 119 for 263 from 3. That's ridiculous. So if anything, my only concern is I want to see him shoot it more this year. If you're going to be 45% on 4.2 attempts per game, I'd love to see you get up to 6 or 7 attempts per game, even if that meant you only shot 40%. That's still well worth it when you think about things like effective field goal percentage. Absolutely go and do that. But by the way, Moffitt right now, 3rd in Patriot League history in terms of 3-point field goal percentage. So ridiculous stuff there. And again, this is why I have Colgate number 1 in my only team in tier 1, because it's just ridiculous. But again, I mentioned, I think Lehigh could challenge. So Lehigh and American make up my second tier. With Lehigh, again, that backcourt of Keith Higgins and Tyler Whitney-Sydney is just tough and something different. But Lehigh returns 4 total starters, and that means a lot. But American, right there, in my opinion, with them in tier 2, is also returning 4 starters, including Matt Rogers, who's an absolute stud. Tier 3, this is my most full conference. I've got Lafayette. Watch out. They've got several dudes, but one that's just fun to me is true 7-footer Justin Vanderbaan. And honestly, I think he might be the best pro prospect in this conference. So make sure you get your eyes on him at Lafayette. The other 3 teams that I have in the 3rd tier are Loyola, Holy Cross, and Navy. And then, you always hate to put teams in the bottom tier, but it is what it is. As I said, if I'm challenging Pac-12 and Big Ten not to have participation trophy all conference teams, then I got to be okay putting some teams in my bottom tier. And those 3 teams are Army, Bucknell, and Boston U. Boston, man, I feel for them, replacing so much, including their entire starting lineup. Going to be a tough year. That said, let's get into the guys that I think are going to be really successful. Let me give you my first team, all Patriot League team. And yeah, it's only got 5 dudes on it. What up, Big Ten and Pac-12? The first. So by the way, if you've not watched any of our conference previews, one of the things that I do is hold myself to only pick, no team can have more than 1 player on my first team. And so, if I was doing it truly, I'd probably have, like, if I was voting for the Patriot League postseason awards, I wouldn't be surprised if I had 2 Colgate players and 2 Lehigh players on it, honestly. But right now, at no more than 1 player per team. So my Colgate representative is Keegan Records, 6'10", forward, 5th-year senior, 13 points a game last year, 6 boards, 1.3 assists, 1.3 blocks, 67.5% from the field, and 33.3% from 3. I mean, it's just a phenomenal stat line as a 6'10" dude. Really, really impressive stuff. Also, Keith Higgins Jr. from Lehigh, we talked about him, part of that dynamic backcourt. And so he's the representative I choose for Lehigh, 6'4" guard, a junior, 14.7 points a game, 2.7 boards, 1.7 assists, 1.1 steals, and over 40% from 3, 41.4%. Give me some Keith Higgins. Next on my list, Matt Rogers from American, 6'9" forward, a senior. Also, by the way, who's American's mascot? The Eagles. One of my easiest ones to remember because American Eagle, right? Does that still exist? Is that still a store? I don't even know. 6.3 rebounds for Rodgers, 1.8 assists, 61.3% from the field. So again, very efficient from the floor, but also over 40%, 40.8% from three. Great stuff there from Rodgers. We got several stretch bigs on this list. Fourth on my all-team first conference Patriot League is Deion Perry from Loyola. 5'8" guard. Shout out to the short dudes. I'm like 5'11". Never quite made it to 6 foot. Perry's a sophomore. He was part of the all-freshman team last year. 11.4 points, 2.1 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.5 steals, and 41.8% from three. So filling out that stat sheet. You'll love to see that, especially as a shorter guard. Great stuff there. And yet another player shooting over 40% from three. Finally, rounding out my first team all Patriot League is another sophomore who was part of that all freshman team last year is Will Batchelder from Holy Cross, 6'1" guard, 12.3 points last year, 2 rebounds, 1.9 assists, and another higher than 40% 3-point shooter. He shot 40.4% last year and made 88 as a freshman. Homie hit 88 threes. I firmly would be shocked if he didn't make it to triple digits this year. Crazy stuff. So keep your eyes on all of these guys. My player of the year got to be Keegan Records from Colgate, 6'10", fifth-year guy. I think he's just going to have a massive year for who should be the best team by far in this conference. My freshman of the year, we talked about him earlier as part of that Lehigh backcourt. It's Nasir Whitlock. I think he's going to kind of demand a playing time, but be able to back up that dynamic duo that will be starting. My transfer of the year, got to give Boston U some love because, they're trying to bring in all sorts of guys, is Ben Palacios. So watch out for that up in Boston. My coach of the year, Matt Langle, Colgate. I know he wins this award a lot, but they're going for a four-peat in winning the conference tournament back-to-back years. Never been done in the Patriot League. Holy Cross also won 3 in a row. Can't remember the years, but never been done 4 times in a row. You can't not give it to him if he does it. And no surprise here, but both my conference tournament champion and my regular season champion is Colgate. They're going dancing again. This is one of those where I would be truly shocked if somebody else won either of these, like not far behind like Gonzaga levels of shocked if they didn't win either the regular season or the conference tournament. All right, folks, that's it for our Patriot League preview. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnCBB. You can follow me at Isaac Shade. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on audio and video format. Smash the like button if you're watching so we know you are here. And we'd love to hear your comments on the Patriot League and how you think it will play out this year. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.